Hello, welcome everyone. I see some familiar names, so hopefully some of you have been in some of our webinars over the course of the last few months and know a little bit about what to expect. But if you're new here, my name is Amy Johnston. I am the clinical director at Urban Wellness, which is a counseling center in Chicago. I'm a clinical social worker, and I do a lot of sort of workplace well-being and education around mental health, well-being, compassion fatigue, trauma, burnout, all these kind of buzzwords that we've been experiencing really forever, but we've been talking about much more kind of in the last maybe 5, 10 years, especially since kind of COVID times. So we are going to have our final webinar of the series today, and we're covering compassion fatigue and how to kind of acknowledge it, address it, and move through it. And then we will also have our in-person full day trainings coming up in November. So I'm sure we'll give you a plug for that at the end. But when I talk about compassion fatigue, really to me, one of the most important pieces is that we can't do anything about it until we acknowledge that it's happening and what impact it's having on us. So, a lot of what we're going to focus on today is just understanding kind of what's happening in our brains and bodies when we are dealing with compassion fatigue, how to recognize it. Um, and then what to do about it. So we're going to spend some time on that today. This is super casual and informal, so feel free to unmute and ask questions, use the chat to ask questions or share comments. Sometimes I do break us out into breakout groups to have smaller conversations. We'll see how many people join. Right now, we only have 10 people on the call, so we may be able to just kind of all stick together, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So the roadmap for us over the next 80 minutes or so, we're going to just check in and see how everyone's doing today. We are going to learn a little bit about compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, what it is, what it does in our brains and bodies, thinking about our distress responses, so how our brains and bodies respond to the experience of compassion fatigue. And then we're going to switch over to the sort of what do we do about it place. So, what are some restorative practices that we can engage in as folks working in schools, nonprofits, with students, with potentially vulnerable populations? Talk a little bit about setting boundaries, and then just thinking about how can we take some of these actions with us into our roles over the next weeks and months. That's the plan. We'll see if we get through everything. Okay, so quick check-in. We'll just do this in the chat. Just so I know kind of energy levels in the room today, how full is your fuel tank right now? Right? Are you like a full tank, ready to go, full of energy, fully caffeinated? Maybe you're at that three-quarters tank where you're kind of feeling pretty good, mostly there. Maybe you're at a solid half, kind of feeling steady, but not sort of energized or not. Or are you dipping a little bit lower? Maybe you're at that quarter tank. Maybe you need to fill up some soon. Maybe you're a bit hungry. Maybe you're kind of hitting that, midday slump. Or are you on fumes, right? Like should have fueled up 30 miles back and you're just really hoping that you're not going to run out of gas before you can get to the gas station. Let's see where we're at in the chat. All right, we've got three quarters, one quarter, three quarters, three quarters, half, a solid half, slightly more, half, half. We got some fumes, half. Okay, so we have a really big mix of where people's energy levels are right now. Anywhere from fumes to three quarters. I don't think we have anyone who's all the way full. Okay, so we're all kind of over the place. I had the very literal experience of running on fumes not too long ago. I was driving from Chicago out to the suburbs to teach a class, and I just forgot that my fuel light had been on for a couple days, but I only usually drive like 1 or 2 miles at a time between my house, my job, and my kids' school. We're all in like a little tiny triangle. So usually when my light comes on, I know I still have a couple days. And then on this day, I had to drive like 35 miles to go teach a class, which, in Chicago is a long way. And it wasn't until I was like cruising down the highway 20 miles out that I realized my light was still on. And I panicked and I thought, oh my gosh, not only am I going to run out of gas on the side of the road, but I'm also going to miss the training I'm supposed to be giving. So luckily, there was a gas station close by. But we also need to think about that in terms of our mental health and well-being. Like oftentimes we know that we're starting to kind of lower our fuel levels a little bit. We're getting to that half a tank, we're getting to that quarter tank. And we know that we need to take a break or that we need to rest or we need to do something to kind of fill ourselves back up again. But it's like one more phone call, one more project, one more day. If I just get to the weekend, if I just get to my vacation. And before we know it, we're on fumes and maybe in a little bit of a panic mode. So just something to think about as we're going through some of the potential impacts today of how this hard work really can get to us. I like to start these conversations out by defining mental health. And if you've been to some of these before, you've heard my spiel, but I'm going to give it again because it's important. I really like to think about mental health in terms of mental well-being and then mental illness, and that it's a spectrum. So, mental health, I'd like to think of it as actually a state of well-being. Oftentimes, when we think of mental health, you actually think of mental illness. People say mental health, and you think anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all kind panic attacks, right? When someone says mental health, you think of bad mental health. But mental health is also the state of well-being where we can cope with stress, we can handle things, we can work productively, we can contribute to our communities. So when we are mentally healthy, we're actually in a state of really solid, positive well-being. There's also mental illness, and many folks have it, right? There's lots of people that are diagnosed with a mental illness. And this is where we actually have a clinically significant challenge where our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors are being negatively impacted by what's going on in our mental health or lack of, right? Mental health is a spectrum, and we all live on it. So I always show this slide because I think it's a good visual to think about mental health like lanes in a swimming pool, right? 1 out of 5 people have a mental health diagnosis at any given time, but 5 out of 5 people have mental health. Every one of us, every day, all the time. So you could be swimming along in that thriving lane, but all of a sudden you kind of veer over a little bit and you end up in struggling. And then you kind of get back on track and you're back in the thriving lane again. So mental health isn't like separate buckets where you jump from one to the other. It really is more of a spectrum, more of a fluid space where you might have some parts of your life that are thriving. You might be performing really well at work. Your boss is giving you top ratings, everyone's happy with you, you're doing amazing work. But you might have trouble sleeping, right? You might have a hard time falling asleep at night. Or you might be doing great with your eating, your socializing, your sleeping, like your life outside of work is doing fantastic, but you might be irritable in the office, right? Or your performance might not be as well. So, really thinking about how different parts of your life can be impacted in different ways, and you can be thriving in some areas and struggling in others. And this is, the same goes for your colleagues and your students. So you may have a student that's getting straight A's, really like performing super well, getting like ticking all the boxes, but internally they're really anxious or they're not sleeping or they're having panic attacks. So just because one part of them is showing up thriving doesn't mean that we don't sometimes have to dig a little bit deeper. Um, but digging deeper can definitely take a toll on us. And so, what we're talking about today is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, these are all slightly different words, topics, definitions, but they are tied together, and a lot of them have similar impacts, even though they might come from different roots. So, compassion fatigue is really this profound sense of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion. It happens gradually, right? It comes on us little by little, and we start to lose empathy. We might start to lose hope. We definitely start to lose compassion for others and ourselves, right? We are getting tired of caring. We can get bitter. We might be making more mistakes. We might feel guilty or resentful, but we develop compassion fatigue because we care so much, right? So sometimes folks become burned out because they just don't care anymore, right? Like it's boring, they're not interested, they're overworked. Burnout is not necessarily related to caring so much, whereas compassion fatigue is literally like, I have run out of compassion. I have run out of care to give. I've given so much of myself that there's nothing left, right? So I guess for yourselves, maybe just think a little bit about If that's something you've ever experienced, you might be experiencing it right now. You might have experienced it in previous roles, but at the moment, maybe you're doing okay. Tell you a little bit about my compassion fatigue and trauma experiences, maybe if we have some time. I asked ChatGPT to tell me what compassion fatigue feels like and make it funny. And ChatGPT told me that compassion fatigue is what happens when you've cared so much that your soul packs a tiny little suitcase, writes a passive-aggressive note, and books a one-way flight to a remote island where no one needs anything ever. And I really liked that definition because that's definitely how my compassion fatigue shows up when I've run out of steam. Is like, I just want to go somewhere far away by myself, peace and quiet, and everyone leave me alone. That doesn't mean I don't love my kids. It doesn't mean I don't love my job. It doesn't mean I don't love my clients or the people that I work with. But sometimes you get to that place where you just need no one to need you, right? And so we also talk about this in terms of caregiver fatigue and other types of sort of exhaustion that it comes from caring so much. So maybe in the chat, yeah, we'll keep it in the chat for now, or you're welcome to come off mute and share. I'm just wondering, what does compassion fatigue feel like for you, right? Like if you've ever experienced it or you're currently experiencing it, how do you know? What does it feel like? What happens for you, just in a couple of words or a sentence, when you're starting to feel that sense of running out of steam for caring? Okay, we got some in the chat. Fatigue at work leads me to be less attentive at home, specifically during conversations with family. Yes, it can definitely impact how we show up at home. We're going to talk about that. Guilty and detached from work and home. Yep. I feel like you guys have seen my notes about what's coming. I can become very indifferent and withdrawn. So we've got detached, guilty, withdrawn, inattentive. I feel like I need to lock myself in a room or drive at 25 in a 70 to get home. Okay, irritable, withdrawn. Yeah, so we notice in ourselves when we actually stop to think about it that when we're running out of capacity for caring, it can definitely have an impact on us in more than one part of our life, right? I was giving a similar talk about compassion fatigue to a group of lawyers. It was a group of law firm administrators, so sort of like the business bosses of law firms. We've got snippy and grumpy. Oh, me too, for sure. Snippy's a good word. And I was going to teach them about compassion fatigue and like running out of care. And one of the organizers of the conference said, "We really love all the content. It's so important. We really want everyone to learn all this. But could we change the title or call it something else? Because compassion fatigue just sounds so negative. And nobody wants to think that they don't have compassion." And that was such an interesting kind of moment for me of like, wow, we are struggling with even saying the words compassion fatigue, right? Like if we can't even acknowledge that we're running out of compassion or that it's hard or we're not always feeling compassionate, how are we meant to do anything about it? So, of course, I said, no, we can't change the title. We have to call it compassion fatigue. It is what it is. But it's important to even pay attention to that, that saying I have compassion fatigue, or I'm running out of compassion, or I am grumpy, I'm snippy, I'm irritable, I'm withdrawn, I don't want to be around people. Like that, we feel really bad about that, right? We feel guilty when it's just something that's happening to us and that we need to be aware of. So thank you for sharing those. And you're right, and all of the above, right? All of those things are part of dealing with compassion fatigue. Absolutely. The other kind of category that we're going to cover a little bit today that's very similar to compassion fatigue, but slightly its own definition is vicarious trauma. So, compassion fatigue is what happens to us when we care so much that we sort of run out of steam for caring. Vicarious trauma is what happens when we're witnessing trauma and we have the impacts of that trauma as if it happened to us. So, trauma is subjective. It's an emotional response to an experience that we feel is distressing. So what's traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you. If you and I were both standing on a street corner and we witnessed a car accident happen in front of us in the intersection, I might say, wow, I am so grateful that I didn't just get hit. Lucky for me that I was standing on the curb. I hope those people are okay. Wow, that was wild to watch and go about my day. I might tell someone I saw a car accident that day, but I would just be grateful that I didn't get injured. Whereas you may experience that as a near-death experience, right? You may say, oh my gosh, I nearly got hit. If I would have stepped off the curb 1 second sooner, that could have been me. Like you may feel that your life and safety was really at risk by being so close to a car accident or watching the car crash and being afraid for the people in the car, etc., right? So your experience of that might be very traumatizing, whereas my experience might not have been. It's subjective in that trauma isn't about the thing that happened, it's about how we experience it and what we believe about it. So, trauma is when you feel that your life or safety is at risk, or the life or safety of someone that you care about is at risk. That's a very simplified version of it, but that's sort of trauma generally. And vicarious trauma is what happens when we're hearing and absorbing the stories of trauma that others have experienced. Our brains can't always untangle what's actually dangerous and what we're hearing about. And we can experience that as if it's our own trauma. So I worked in Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago for 6 years in the emergency room and the ICU. And when I worked in the ICU, especially, I would sit with parents and spend a lot of time talking with them about what was going on for them, how their child came to be in the intensive care unit. And they would tell me very traumatic stories, right, of the types of things that had happened that had landed their child in the ICU. And I would sometimes start to experience that same anxiety, that same stress, that same sometimes even sense of panic, even though it didn't happen to me, because my brain was picking up on someone else's trauma. So when you are in a role where you're working with students or working with colleagues that are struggling, or, I know that some of you all that have met in person in some of our trainings have worked in offices where you work with students who are dealing with immigration issues or housing issues or severe mental health, right? When you're hearing stories of struggle, it really impacts you. We've got some, I feel, vicarious trauma as a mom when school shootings happen. Such a good point, right? When we're hearing about horrible traumatic things happening elsewhere in the country, we can have that same sense of fear and panic in ourselves. Right. So, vicarious trauma ultimately is what happens when you're witnessing so much of other people's pain that it starts to feel like you're living through it yourself. So, it can really impact you emotionally, wear us out, leave us foggy. And so, that vicarious trauma as a mom when school shootings happen is a great example. I'm wondering in the chat, or feel free to unmute, does anyone else have an example of what might cause you to experience vicarious trauma? Either stories or things in the news or things going on in your community, or if you're in a role where you're listening to people's traumas. When or how has vicarious trauma shown up for you, if it has?
I think for me, hi, good morning. Sorry, first of all. But for me, I'm seeing it a lot with everything going on with um, in Chicago and well, really else in all other parts of the country with immigration. And I work directly with undocumented students, so I actually didn't even recognize until I saw it right now on the screen that I do feel very emotionally worn and I am experiencing a lot of brain fog because obviously I'm um, taking in a lot of what students come to me with. You know, I've had students break down in my office. And so, um, yeah, I think that's also an example of how this trauma is, obviously we're hearing it, but we see it. And so it affects us in a different way too.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's a very scary time to be in Chicago right now, especially for immigrant families. Like my husband's a green card holder. He's from Ireland, so we do have that privilege of him being a white immigrant. But it's also kind of getting to a place where doesn't feel like anyone's really safe. So it's been a scary time to be here. And I'm sure a lot of your students are feeling that across the board. What else? Any other ways that you all have experienced vicarious trauma or things that might kind of trigger that feeling for you of like it didn't happen to you, but now hearing about it makes you feel that way?
I just wanted to unmute and say that I feel like my brain kind of goes to this tendency a lot where I just feel like I could watch a emotional scene of a show, and if it has some sort of connection to it, it feels like I'm living that or something, or my brain will take it and it will become a part of my dream,
Mm,
and then at night. And so then it feels like it's me living through it anyway. So this is I didn't have a name for it. But yes.
yeah. Yeah, especially if you're like reading a book, watching a movie, watching a show where you're feeling emotionally connected, our brains can't always piece apart what's real and what's not. Yeah. If anyone else has other ideas or things that come up, feel free to add them to the chat. We'll keep going just to stay on time, but I would imagine most of us have had experiences, especially in the type of work that you all do with students, where vicarious trauma has come into play, where you've heard a story of someone else experiencing trauma and it really hits you, right? Whether that's physically, your heart rate, your breathing changes, your body tenses, you might cry, you might feel a pit of your stomach, or if it's more of an emotional response of feeling really sad, really, or panicked, anxious, things like that. So when we have that reaction to someone else's pain. And that's happening to us, especially in the kind of work we do. So part of it is that we're feeling trauma on multiple levels, a layer cake of trauma, right? So we're all going to have our own personal experiences with things that we've dealt with traumatic in our lives, right? Whether those are sort of capital T, big traumas or smaller experiences of trauma. We also have loved ones that have been traumatized in different ways, right? Our parents, our kids, our neighbors, the people that we care about that have gone through hard things. We're also dealing with our students that are experiencing trauma and the stories that they're either talking to you personally about or the things that you're hearing kind of through your organization, through your department, through your leadership. We're also looking at trauma around higher education as a field, right? So the political landscape around higher education is really rough right now, right? And I would imagine that there's a lot of trauma within higher education. And from what I've talked about with my own clients and people in my community, that there's so much uncertainty, so much fear around what's okay, what's not okay, budgets, funding, um, generally speaking, higher education can feel like a very traumatic place to be right now. And then we kind of have an existential crisis of trauma right now in our country, right? And no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, it can feel like the stakes are really high for who we are as a nation. So we've got no shortage of levels of trauma that are all impacting us and kind of coming at us from different places and angles. So when I think about it that way, it's just kind of like, well, no wonder we're struggling, right? It does not make it easier, but it can be helpful sometimes just to acknowledge, like, yeah, that's a lot, right? There is a whole lot coming at us at the same time. And so, why are we specifically at risk, right? Folks who work in the types of areas that you do, that I do, what makes it harder? Well, number one, empathy, right? Now, I would imagine that most of you consider yourselves to be empathetic people. If you don't consider yourself to be empathetic, maybe this doesn't apply to you. But people who go into the types of work that many of us do tend to be very empathetic. And it's important, and it's a way that we connect, and it's a way that we help people feel seen and heard and cared for. It's also exhausting, right? Because empathy is really the experience of trying to not just feel bad for someone because of what they're going through, but it's really trying to find that piece of you that knows what it's like to struggle and connect with that piece of you in order to make your best attempt to feel that you can understand what someone else is experiencing. So empathy takes an emotional toll on us because we are sort of touching into those parts of ourselves that have struggled in order to connect. It's really important and it's really powerful, but it's exhausting. Another reason that we're struggling is insufficient recovery time. We're all too busy, right? We don't have enough time literally between one crisis and the next to take care of ourselves before we have to jump into the next thing. So I imagine that many of us have an experience where like something really difficult is happening. We wrap it up. Sometimes it takes longer than we expect, and we're already late for our next meeting or our next class or our next appointment, right? We're trying to run from one thing to the next with such speed that we don't have time in between to fill ourselves back up again. So we're depleted a lot of the time, right? Lots of depletion. We've all got our own unresolved personal trauma, and we're not going to be in group therapy today, so we won't talk about it here, but we've all had things that have happened that we haven't addressed, right? Whether we're in therapy or not, whether we've talked about it with friends, whether we've journaled about it, we've all had experiences that have been really hard for us that can be triggered when we're hearing about someone else's experience. So, someone who maybe has a history of sexual violence now has a student coming to them talking about an assault that they've experienced, or someone who has experienced maybe risk of losing their housing or has struggled financially is now trying to help support students who are struggling financially. These things are going to take a toll on us as well. And those students themselves are vulnerable. So, working with students, working with children, working with elderly, working with people that we feel are vulnerable in the system also sort of increases and exacerbates the impact of that compassion fatigue on us. We've got systemic isolation and fragmentation. That's one of the reasons that webinars like this or our in-person training days that are coming up are so important because we need opportunities for folks to come together who are having similar experiences to take care of one another, support one another, share your stories, and share your wisdom because we are isolated. Everyone's kind of working in their own silos a lot of the time. And so, I've talked to a lot of folks through the past year working with this group of like, there might be one counselor on a campus or one person who does the job that they do, and they don't have anyone else within their campus that's sort of in their same role. So we don't have a lot of opportunity for folks to connect over shared experiences. And then finally, lack of resources, right? We never have enough money, funding, resources to support everyone with all the things they need. So we're often working on shoestring budgets, trying to figure out ways to take care of folks with not quite enough. So if any of you have more than enough resources, please share your secrets because I think everybody else would love to know. Those are some of the reasons that um, vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue really do kind of get to some folks more than others. And this could also show up at home if you have a partner who works maybe in like accounting or um, some other my husband's a plumber. Like he doesn't really have a lot of compassion fatigue from being a plumber. He's got different kinds of fatigue, maybe physically, but it can be hard sometimes when the people in your life aren't working in the same types of work that you are. They may not really understand all of these things that are happening for you. So just thinking for a little bit about how you all might experience different types of trauma at work. So it might be through illness, death, violence, conflict, like in your actual workplace, right? This is where we're talking about things like school shootings or less acute traumas, but colleagues being sick or students being ill or people passing away. We're also experiencing trauma while we're hearing and absorbing the stories that our students and colleagues are telling us. We're looking at those societal injustices, and then we're coming to terms with our own sense of uncertainty, fear, and distress, right? So maybe just a few moments in the chat. Any ways that you have experienced trauma at work or things that maybe which of these on the list tend to come up for you the most, or other ways that trauma has shown up for you in the workplace specifically? Or unmute. I feel like all those low fuel tanks must be showing up right now. We've got, let's see, I'm working in financial aid, so I hear stories from students every day. Yes. So when you're working in financial aid, you're probably hearing multiple stories a day of students that are struggling to just pay their bills or get food and get groceries, things like that, or fear that they're not going to be able to pay their tuition. Got two and three for sure. Number two. Yeah, we're hearing these stories. Makes me want to avoid the news altogether. Yeah, and avoidance is a strategy that works a little bit, right? Like when we avoid the news, we sometimes don't have to face all the struggles that are going on. For me, that leads to the secondary problem of feeling guilty about avoiding, because then it's like, oh, well, that's just my privilege to avoid, whereas other people are living it. So that gives me an added level of stress sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, all of these things are coming up for us a lot of the time, right? I oversee the emergency bill pay and feel horrible that I have to deny people, but the college has put forth very specific requirements for eligibility. Oh, Sarah, that's such a tough one, right? Where you have to abide by rules and policies that maybe feel too strict or feel unfair, or that lack of resources, right? There's only so much to go around, and we have to be really um, strict on how we allocate those resources, especially as we have to respond to the social inequalities from a system level. We see lots more than just one campus, and it can feel overwhelming. Yes. Yeah, for those of you that are kind of working in the big picture, um, we are not just looking at one campus or one department or one group. You're looking at this overarching system level need. Yeah. Right. It's a lot. We're feeling overwhelming. Okay. I promise you we're going to feel better by the time we finish today, right? I'm bringing you down into the trenches right now, but we are going to come back out of it. But we have to understand what we're dealing with before we can move forward. So we're going to go through a little bit of an extensive list here, but I want you to stick with me. We're going to cover 16 indicators of distress. And these are from a book called Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. I love her. She was a social worker, is a social worker, and she wrote this incredible book about how we should consider ourselves as trauma stewards. So instead of like taking someone's trauma, absorbing it, and like letting it live in us, we're really trying to just care for folks who are experiencing trauma and try to still protect our own mental health and well-being. And she wrote this book because she was really bad at it, right? So she found herself being really soaked in trauma and compassion fatigue and wanted to figure out a way around quitting, right? If she couldn't keep doing the job. So, indicators of distress. We have to know what's lighting up our dashboard. So, one very common one is feeling helpless and hopeless. Like, what's the point? I can't do anything. This is a disaster, right? When we're looking at these giant system level issues and feeling like there's nothing we can do about it, we can really get stuck in that space. A sense that we can never do enough. So, even when we are working, it just feels like a drop in the bucket compared to this big amount of need. We might be experiencing hypervigilance, this sense of always on, always activated, always ready to jump. And this can be sort of anticipatory anxiety, always trying to make sure that we're one step ahead. Or it could be a very real, very valid experience of not feeling safe, right? In our communities, in our jobs, in our roles. Folks that are experiencing, are living in marginalized identities, like, they may very well have every right to feel unsafe, depending on where you're living and what the kind of community situation is. Hypervigilance is not necessarily unfounded. For me, it even shows up like on vacation. My husband laughs at me because I'll be like, okay, we have to hurry up and have fun, right? Like the list of fun and things to do. So hypervigilance definitely shows up for me. Diminished creativity. And by this one, I don't just mean like not doing art or not playing music. Although, if you're someone who likes to do art or make music or create things and you notice that you're not doing that, that's definitely an important sign, right? I used to paint all the time. I haven't painted in years. And sometimes I have to pay attention to like, is it because I'm doing other things instead or because I'm feeling really overwhelmed? But it can also mean kind of inability to be creative in our workplaces, in our solutions, in our problem solving, right? Inability to kind of build relationships and be creative in sort of social and emotional ways. So it's an interesting one to think about. Okay, then we've got inability to embrace complexity. So this is having very black and white thinking, right? It's either a yes or a no. Really just wanting to make snap decisions because we're overwhelmed by the details. And so when we're finding, especially maybe like in a team meeting or in a conflict with a colleague, that we don't have the capacity or the space to really like dig into the conversation and think through potential solutions and think out of the box, right? If we're noticing that we don't have that ability, we may be dealing with some pretty intense kind of vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. Minimizing. And this one is like really happens a lot when you do have a partner or kids or roommates or family members who work in maybe less stressful or stressful in a different way environments. So when I worked at the Children's Hospital, sadly, kids would die on my unit in front of me, sometimes in the room with me, depending on what was happening. And so a bad day at work was a really bad day. And like I said, my husband's a plumber. And so I would get home and he might be like, oh, I had such a bad day at work today. And all I could think is like, well, did a child die? Right? Like minimizing his experience of what was a bad day, right? Dealing with people's backed up sewage and angry customers and all those things. It was a bad day, but for me, I couldn't hear that because my day was so much worse. And the reason that we tend to minimize when we're exhausted from compassion fatigue is because remember that we talked about before, we pride ourselves on being empathetic people, right? So if we are people who are empathetic and caring and someone we love comes to us with a problem, we want to be able to show up for them. And if we're saturated, right? If you're like a sponge who's full and you just can't take anymore, then the only way to make yourself feel a little bit better is to minimize it, to go, that's not that big of a problem, right? Because if we were to accept that they were really struggling and we can't help them or we can't show up for them, that's going to make us feel bad about ourselves. So we minimize so that we don't have to feel so bad that we can't show up a lot of the time. Chronic exhaustion or physical problems. So I don't know how many times this has happened to you, but it's definitely happened to me where you go to the doctor and you have a very medical problem that you would like a medical solution to, right? Like back pain, GI issues, migraines, and your doctor tells you you need to reduce your stress, right? Or you need to take it easy, take a break, slow down. It's a very unsatisfying answer, but it is true that when we're experiencing compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, we're exhausted, we're fatigued, we're sore, we're going to have muscle pain or GI issues. All of these things are going to flare up. We might have this inability to listen or really avoiding, right? So, like not checking your messages, not responding to emails, going the long way to the bathroom to avoid having to walk past someone, not being able to have meaningful conversations because you're just out, you have no capacity, right? All of these things can show up. And this is like a buffet of options. So not all of these show up for everyone. It really is sort of a pick your own adventure. Um, okay, we're pretty good on time. Dissociative moments. So somebody mentioned in the chat earlier that feeling of like detachment and distraction, right? We can feel very detached. We could be driving home from work and all of a sudden you're in your garage and you don't even really remember how you got there. You can lose track of minutes of a conversation, right? Zoning out. And a lot of times it is because we are so overloaded with information and care that it's our brain's safety valve, right? It's our brain's way of trying to keep us from overwhelm. So we do kind of zone out and dissociate sometimes. We might have a sense of persecution, like everyone's against us. My boss hates me. My students hate me. Like no one cares. Everyone's against me. We can feel very isolated in that. And then something else you guys brought up in the chat was that feeling of guilt. We can feel so guilty when we're running out of compassion, right? Especially if we're running out of compassion for our family members, our kids, right? For me, when I was struggling with this at the hospital, I had very little left for my husband and my kids, right? And then I felt really guilty because I was snapping at them, I was irritable at them, I wasn't showing up for them, and then I felt terrible. And then there can be some fear, right? We can be really afraid of like, what is going on for me? And what if I can't keep doing this, right? Like if you're someone who, like, I'm a social worker, And social work comes with this, all of this. It comes with the territory. And what if I can't do that anymore? Can be a really scary thought. And finally, we've almost made it to the end of our list here. Thank you for sticking with me. Um, Anger and cynicism. This one definitely shows up for me, being more irritable, more snippy. You guys talked about this in the chat, like having just a bad attitude, the what's the point feeling. And anger is often talked about like kind of being more of a surface level emotion because there's usually something underneath it. Right. So when we're angry, sometimes we're just righteously angry, but a lot of times when we're angry, it's sort of covering up disappointment, sadness, shame, feeling left out, feeling isolated, other things. And so the problem is that sort of disappointment and sadness are very internal feelings. We feel those inside of ourselves. And anger is a really external one. We can put anger out towards other people. We can like kind of shout anger outside of ourselves, where some of those other hard emotions feel very much internal. So sometimes we end up showing up angry when there's something else going on underneath. Inability to empathize or numbing, talked a little bit about this in terms of just not being able to show up for people, like that sponge that's full. We can't absorb anything else. And so often we'll just numb out, right? Like just don't care. I just don't care. And I've found myself saying that before at work when people come to me with problems, I'll either say it or think it, like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. When it does matter, but I don't have the capacity anymore. Addictions can definitely show up. So sometimes addictions are completely separate from this, and people can have addiction problems without being in this sort of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma state. But if you tend to use substances to cope, you just want to keep an eye on that, or if people you care about do, that addictions can flare up more when you're in this state, whether it's to substances, to gambling, other types of addictions. And then finally, one of my personal favorites, grandiosity. And this is this inflated sense of your own self-importance. This one shows up for me a lot at home. Like, I can't possibly go away because nobody else will be able to get the kids organized and to school on time, and they won't have breakfast, and they'll be in mismatched clothes, and they'll miss their appointments, and the dog won't get walked, and nothing will be, done the way I would want to do it. When really, like, they'll be fine. They'll figure it out. My husband's a capable human. It'll be okay. Right. And often at work, this can show up in terms of, feeling like you can't take time off or you can't delegate, or if you put anything down, the entire thing's going to crash. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's true because you've created a system that looks like that, right? Because you haven't been able to delegate and build sort of a support system. And sometimes it's true because you're a one-man band and there's no one to help you. So being able to kind of discern what you've created and what you might be able to kind of reallocate within your system. All right. Those are our 16 indicators of distress. There's probably a lot more out there, but these are the ones that Laura Vandernoot Lipsky talks about, and I think are a helpful starting point. So we'll do the chat, or we'll stay all together, I think. So either unmute and share or in the chat, which of these tends to light up your dashboard the most? Where do you find yourself struggling? And are there any of these that maybe you hadn't thought of as a distress response? You might have just thought like, I'm just not very good at this, or I'm doing it wrong, or I'm just an irritable person, that now you're like, oh, but I didn't think about it as a distress response. But yes, that absolutely happens for me. What shows up for you guys? All right, we've got some in the chat. So we've got some helpless, hopeless, and deliberate avoidance. Yep, absolutely. Cynicism. Not hard to be cynical sometimes when you're working in these big systems, for sure. Guilt. Yep. Grandiosity is a sneaky one for me, and that it's not as obvious and it compounds the stress. Yeah, Amy, that's such a good point, right? It does sneak up on us. And when you're in that state, it makes everything else feel harder. What else do we have? Dissociative moments, guilt, anger, cynicism, numbing, true millennial dissociative moments. Is that something that's specific to millennials, Brittany? Maybe. I know I get them. The sense that I can never do enough, hypervigilance, feeling like I can never do enough. Truthfully, all of it at different times through my life. I would say I can never do enough and grandiosity are the biggest ones, though. Yeah. And so often, the youths, so often when I put this slide up, the answers that I get, sometimes I have everybody go into breakout rooms to talk a little bit more about these. And I was going to have us do that, but we're going to be too short on time for that today. But often the response I get when people come back is all of the above, right? That like almost everything on that list shows up for folks sometimes. And sometimes it's really clear that that's what, that's what's happening, that these are responses to the stressors of the work and the compassion fatigue and the vicarious trauma. But sometimes I've had people go, like, I had never put the two and two together, that that's where this is coming from, or that it's even impacted by that, or that it's not my fault, right? That like there is something going on that's creating these experiences or kind of impacting me in that way. So it seems like we got a few grandiosities and a lot of I can never do enoughs. That one came up a few good times. Um, some guilt, some hopelessness. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, all of that to say that y'all are not alone, right? Everyone here and everyone who's ever seen this slide that I've taught this to, and there's been hundreds of people that have seen this, have all said the same thing. This is all showing up for us because it is hard. The work we're doing is really, really hard. So, who knows what kind of bird that is? Pop it in the chat if you know. Canary, Marcus got it. And does anybody know what canaries were used for in the olden days? Canary in the coal mine, right? And some of you might have already heard this story if you've been in one of my classes before, but it's an important one. Canaries were used in coal mines to detect if the mines were safe. So they would bring the canaries down in the mines. We learned about this in Chicago because at the Museum of Science and Industry, if you've ever been here, you've gone to the coal mine exhibit where you get to go into a fake coal mine and they tell you all the things. They brought the canaries down into the mines. Yep, thank you, coal mine experience at MSI. Amber, I got you. Same, same. Um, they would bring the canaries down in a little cage into the coal mines, and canaries would sing, and they would know that if the canary stopped singing or got sick or died, worst case scenario, that the mine was toxic, right? And that the environment was not safe, and they had to get everybody out. At no point did they say, "Oh, we sure do need to get some stronger canaries down here." Right? The point is not to have a stronger canary who can withstand the toxicity. The point was that the canary is your siren, your alarm bell, saying like things are not okay. So when we're thinking about these indicators of distress, I like to think about it kind of like that canary in the coal mine. I'm not telling you like you just need to be tougher so that you can withstand the toxicity of what you're doing. Although resilience is important, we also need to think about these indicators of distress as alarm bells, going, hey, something's not going well here, right? We really need to pay attention to our environment, our mindset, whatever that is, and try to think about what we need to do to create a better internal environment. Because if all of those indicator lights are going off on your dashboard, there's like a toxic environment happening in your brain, in your body, in your environment that we need to think about. I like that take. We never said get stronger canaries. Right. We're always like, oh, if I was just more resilient or tougher, but the canary is an alarm bell. All right. So what do we do about it? Well, how we restore is as important as how we endure when it comes to resilience. So when we're thinking about being resilient, a lot of the time we're just thinking of it in exactly those terms, Marcus, of like, how do we become stronger or tougher, right? How can we tough it out? How can we handle this difficult situation? But the amount of people that I've worked with in therapy sessions and within groups that were like, I don't want to be resilient. Gosh, I'm tired of being tough. I'm tired of being the strongest. I'm tired of having to overcome all these, adverse situations. Resilience is like the worst. I don't want this anymore. And so instead, if we could reframe resilience a little bit into how we can restore ourselves, and in this case, in the kind of concept we're talking about today, how do we restore our sense of why we're doing the work we're doing and being able to show up for it? Because we don't want to quit necessarily, right? We've decided that we like this work for a reason. It's important to us. It's valuable. How do we restore our kind of our soul in it so that we can keep going? So Laura Vandernoot Lipsky talks about it in terms of 5 directions. So she talks about space for inquiry, choosing our focus, compassion and community, finding balance, and centering. And so we're going to run through these 5 over the next half an hour or so. I know some of you might have to leave at 12 for other appointments. I hope you can stay, but if not, you can definitely catch the recording. But if you do need to drop off, that's okay. We understand. So number 1, space for inquiry. This one is important because like we just spent the first half of this course doing, we have to kind of understand what's going on, right? We need to be curious. We need to think about what's happening, why it's happening. So these are some reflection questions for yourself in terms of helping you to get grounded around the work you're doing. Why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Why do I do this work? Why did I get into it in the first place? Is it still for those same reasons? Am I doing it for a different reason now? Sometimes the answer is I do this to pay my bills, right? I do this because it pays my bills so that I can take care of my kids and family, and that is what's so important to me. That's okay, right? But we need to be honest with ourselves. Why am I still doing what I'm doing? There are many jobs out there in the world. You're doing this one. Why do you keep doing it every day? The next one is what do I get out of this cycle, right? If you're feeling like you are stuck in a cycle of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, there's something in it for you because you keep doing it. So, do you really enjoy or do you get something out of like being that helper or being that support person? Does the problem solving really do it for you? Are you feeling that you're obligated because there's a team of people counting on you? So, what do you get out of it? And then finally, is it working for me? And this is a tough self-reflection question because sometimes the answer is no, right? So for me, when I was working at the hospital, I did get to a space where I had to say, why am I doing this? What am I getting out of it? I was doing it because I loved the families I worked with. I loved the nurses on the floor. I loved the doctors. I liked the adrenaline. I was getting a lot out of that buzz of like the cycles of trauma and being in the mix. And if you've ever worked in a high intensity setting, like there's something you get out of it. I was good at my job. So I got a lot out of the praise, the like, Amy's an amazing social worker. We need her. The grandiosity. I'm important. Is it working for me? That was a harder one to answer, right? I was burned out at home. I was irritable with my little kids. I was commuting 3 hours a day. I was not around for the people that really needed me outside of work. I was getting physically sick, right? So, like, that was the part where I'd be like, oh, it's not anymore. So, sometimes the answer is no, and that's why it's a tough question. Sometimes the answer is yes, like, this is still working for me. All of these things are hard, and there's a lot going on, but I am getting enough out of this. I'm doing this for good value, good reasons. I love this, and this is working for me. And so, that's a kind of a good divider for you to think about kind of what comes next. The next sort of processing point is choosing our focus. So these are, and I'm going to make sure you guys have all these slides. So you can write these down or screenshot them, but Brittany, you'll have all the slides to send out to you as well. So your next set of reflection questions are, where am I putting my focus, right? Our jobs, our experiences are complicated and messy and multitudes of different things coming in. So sometimes we're focusing so much on the most difficult, challenging pieces, but we're losing track or losing vision of some other parts of our work that are really valuable, really important, really beautiful, really nourishing and restorative, right? So our minds, We have a negativity bias, and I think we talked about this last month in terms of how our brains tend to focus in on the most negative pieces. And so we need to be more intentional and train ourselves to also think about what are all the good things that are happening, right? How can we balance them out? So, where am I focusing? What's most important to me? So, really thinking about our values, right? Like, what do you care about more than anything? What is it about the work that really rises to the top for you? And then for those of you that are like, "Ugh, I don't know if this is working, what's my plan B?" And having a plan B is a really powerful strategy to make ourselves more settled and grounded in our work because sometimes we feel trapped. Sometimes we feel like I can't leave, I can't do anything else, I have to do this. But the reality is, you're choosing to do what you're doing, even if you're worn out and compassion fatigued, you're making a choice to still keep that job. And some people think, um, like, if I don't do anything, I'm not making a choice. But if you don't do anything, that's a choice. And so when I say what's your plan B, it doesn't mean I want y'all to quit your jobs. I don't. I hope you all keep your jobs. But when we're thinking of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma and the hard work we do, just having a vision in your head of what would you be doing otherwise can be really important because sometimes you go through that plan B and go, yeah, no, that's not what I want. I want this, right? So I could think through what would my plan B be? Okay, I might do this other job or move to this other place. What are the pros and cons of that? What would be financial ramifications? What will go on with my family? And you go, no, I'm choosing to stay where I am. And by making a choice kind of actively in yourself to keep doing what you're doing, it releases some of that heaviness, right? Whenever we feel like we're in a position that we don't choose, it can be really kind of mentally a struggle. So when we can say, I'm choosing this because it's what I want, even if it's hard, even if it's stressful, even if the trauma and compassion fatigue is high, having the power to choose to do it makes a difference in terms of how our brains react. Really important is compassion and community. And so for me, in any hard job I've ever been in, I got to give a TED Talk a few years ago, which was really fun. It was actually at Normal, Illinois. And it's called Work Wives Make for Better Lives, if you're ever bored and you want to watch a TED Talk. But the idea is that we have all worked in hard jobs, and we have often stayed in really hard jobs for longer than we might have because we loved our team, had a work wife or a work bestie or a work crew or a work family that really took care of us. We took care of them. And having that experience of connection and compassion and community within our work made all the difference, right? We've stayed at jobs because we loved our boss. We've stayed at jobs because we loved our team. We've left jobs because we did not have that connection, right? So creating a microculture within your organization is really powerful and important in buffering the impacts of those mental health challenges. All right, having people that get you, who care about you, who understand you, hugely helpful. We've also got, thanks, Jocelyn. Hopefully you can catch the rest. We've also got to think about practicing self-compassion, which we've talked about this summer as well, in terms of really giving ourselves some space and grace for the hard stuff, right? We're not going to get it right all the time. We are going to feel exhausted and irritable sometimes. It comes with the territory. It's part of being a human being. It doesn't mean we're doing it wrong, right? It means that we are human and we struggle. And then finally, what can I do to promote systemic change? And so for those of you that are thinking of like this big picture struggle that we have within the systems and the organizations, that's when it can feel really overwhelming, right? There's so much going on, there's so many moving pieces, and I'm only one person. What can I do? And so, how do you start to promote systemic change within your sphere of influence, right? So, trying to find ways to feel connected and powerful within what you can do. So, whether that's being on a committee or having conversations with the right people or creating small groups that are making changes on your own campus or within your own department, or if you have a bigger influence, using that influence, right? How do you use the influence you have to start moving things incrementally in the right direction? So, feeling engaged and using your power. Next one is finding balance. And this one can really be a struggle sometimes, especially when the work you're doing feels so intense, so overwhelming, and takes up so much of your time, your energy, your efforts, right? So Number one, setting boundaries, which we're going to talk about actually in a few more slides, but being able to separate and divide between work and life. And I'm not someone who talks about work and life in terms of work-life balance. I work, I have kids, I do a side project, I'm working at night, I'm taking time off during the day. I mix and intermingle my work and life constantly. Work is part of my life. Um, but I do have boundaries in terms of things like I don't check my email after I finish up on a Friday until I go back to work on a Monday. Or, if I do get a message from somebody, like I have to discern whether it's urgent or it can wait. I try really to focus in on my kids' certain parts of my week. I talk with clients a lot about setting boundaries that are struggling with work-related things, of even like putting your phone in a drawer while you're eating dinner with your family. Or if you work from home, closing your laptop, putting on your coat and your shoes and commuting yourself around the block at the end of your work day so that you can sort of mentally separate work from home, especially when we're working remotely or at home. That can be a struggle. Same thing in the morning before you start work. Throw your jacket on, take a walk around the block to commute yourself into work. It just helps us to separate a little bit. And then another part around finding balance is really practices of gratitude. And that can be practices of gratitude within your work, right? Like, even though there are all these difficult things going on, what is it about your role, your job, your department, your students, your colleagues, your organization that you are grateful for? Or things outside of work that your job helps to provide for you. So it could be that you have the best colleagues and that the relationship and the friendship that you built up with them is so important. Or it could be really feeling grateful for the way that you can impact the lives of the students that you work with. Or it could be gratitude that you're in a role that you've worked really hard to get to that, helps provide for your family, right? So whatever that gratitude is, being able to connect it back with why we do what we do. And then finally, centering. And centering is really sort of this internal experience of keeping ourselves grounded. Um, I was thinking about a word last year. I don't always have a word of the year, but sometimes I do. And last year or the year before, my word was equanimity. And I had never heard that word before. But equanimity is the sense of being able to stay kind of balanced or centered or grounded, even in the midst of chaos or things going on around us, right? So being able to kind of sway and move with the challenges. And it's sort of, if you think of the idea of like bamboo reeds versus an oak tree. An oak tree is really strong, really powerful, massive, but in a really bad storm, it can tip over, right? It can be pulled out of the ground and tipped over because it's so rigid that it doesn't have a lot of give. Whereas bamboo reeds are a little more flimsy, a little more flexible, but they tend to do better in a storm because they have more equanimity. They can kind of go with it. So for me, centering lately is really about trying to find that equanimity because the storm is not stopping. The stressors aren't going away. Things are not getting easier necessarily. Um, and we're not trying to just be better canaries, right? We're not trying to just be tougher and stronger like an oak tree. It really is about thinking of like, how do we move with all the things that are happening? So these are going to be different strategies depending on what works for you. But for some folks, it really is journaling, getting your thoughts, feelings, and emotions out of your head, out of your body, and onto paper. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. It can just be free writing. Some folks do things like the morning pages where they just get up and write. Other folks really love a journal that has some prompting or some reflection questions or some ways to get you going. It could be meditation. And I know that most of us have probably thought, like, I can't meditate. I'm not good at meditation. I know that I think that a lot of the time. But meditation can be sitting quietly and focusing on your breath, 100%. But it could also be things like a walking meditation, where you go for a walk in your neighborhood and really spend time tuning into your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? What do you taste? And go for a walk in your community and pay attention to those things. When you're focusing in on your five senses, you don't have space in your mind for thoughts to get in the way. Doesn't mean thoughts won't happen, But when you re-engage with your senses, those thoughts kind of float off. So if you can even give yourself a 5 or 10 minute walk where you really engage with your senses, it's a walking meditation and it can be a really good way to recenter. Yoga, stretching, reconnecting with your body, exercise, anything that really helps you to be in tune with your body is super helpful. And then rituals. Rituals really just mean things that you do the same way every time that helps to feel a sense of familiarity, right? So a ritual can be as simple as you wake up 15 minutes before everyone else and sit at your kitchen table with a warm drink and just sit quietly. It could be lighting candles, it could be, soft blankets, it could be sensory activities, it could be a funny joke or, kind of inside joke you have. It could be having a dance party with your kids after dinner in the kitchen, right? What the ritual is not important. It's the idea that you have something that you can return to every day that feels grounding. All right, we're making okay time. So, giving yourself a couple minutes for self-reflection, we still have a decent crew of folks that have been able to stick with us. I'm just wondering of these five, space for inquiry. So, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Choosing our focus, what's important to me, compassion and community, building those relationships, finding balance, gratitude, having boundaries, or sort of internal centering exercises. Like, which of these do you feel like you're already engaging in, feeling good about, feeling that they're helpful or restorative, and maybe which ones do you need a little bit more of? So maybe starting in well, you can put both, but what do you feel that you're already working on or already engaging in, or what things might be um, a little bit lower for you and that you might need some more of? You can unmute or use the chat. We've got meditation for Amy. Yeah. And another actually really helpful meditation hack for sleeping is I have the Calm app on my phone. There's lots of different meditation apps, but even just putting on a sleep story, which is a really boring voice or a gentle voice telling you a relatively boring story, puts me right to sleep. Let's see, we've got working on finding balance, probably need more centering. I already choose my focus regularly. I'd like to be better at finding balance and centering. Yeah. Yeah. And not all of these are going to be 5 out of 5s for everyone. And not everyone needs to do all of them full speed, right? For some people, compassion and community is going to be so important, but they feel less of a need to work on centering practices, right? And so it's not that you have to do all of them, it's that you have to figure out what works best for you. That community is really important. Doing well with boundaries. I'll leave messages unread until I'm clocked back in. Need to work on centering. Used to do yoga twice a week and the class kept getting canceled, so I've let that habit go away. Yeah, that's a really, that's a tough one when you're not, when someone else has some control over your practices, if the class gets canceled. So even trying to keep yourself in that habit of if class gets canceled, instead you do some gentle stretching on your own or go for a walk or things like that. Now, I am the queen of do as I say, not as I do, because I have a yoga membership at a place I love, and I haven't been there in over a month, so easier said than done. Centering is pretty strong and finding balance, but maybe more work on space for inquiry. Yeah. Yeah, and I think all of these are invitations, right? It's an invitation to maybe think through some of these reflection questions and see what comes up for you. And sometimes when we give ourselves the chance to really think about why we're doing what we're doing, it solidifies our resolve. It helps us to reconnect with our purpose. It helps us to reconnect with that younger, more idealistic version of ourselves that was so excited to get into this work. Yeah. All right, let's talk a tiny bit about boundaries. We talked about being a sponge a little bit, and this idea that you really cannot absorb more once you're saturated, right? The kind of work we do, we're constantly absorbing, and at some point, you've got no more capacity. You have to think about how are we going to wring ourselves out so that we can continue to do the work. And what do we need in order to do that? So that's where those strategies really come into play. It's like when we're thinking about community, balance, centering, what are the practices that help us to wring it out a little bit so that we're able to show up again? As a social worker, I really love the sentence, you don't have to light yourself on fire to keep other people warm. And this is one I probably learned too late in my career. But we often want to do absolutely everything we can as folks in helping professionals to support other people. And oftentimes it comes at our own expense, right? But there is a difference between maybe like if you're wearing 4 layers, taking off a layer or two to give to someone else and still being relatively okay yourself, if maybe just a slight bit chilly, or dousing yourself on fire to become a source of heat for those around you, right? And I know that's an extreme example, but we tend as caregivers to give of ourselves a lot, right? The type of work that we're doing, but it really is trying to discern at what point are you giving more than you have the capacity for, because eventually you will not be able to keep giving. And if your goal is to have longevity in this work, you have to be able to keep yourself warm as well. You don't have to fix everything. You can't fix everything, to be honest, right? Like we cannot fix all the problems. What we can do is show up, hold space, be caring and supportive. We can listen. And we've talked about this in some of our other sessions, but the idea that, oftentimes if you bring a problem or a stressor to someone and they start throwing solutions at you, it's actually really irritating. It's not what you wanted. It doesn't feel supportive. You just wanted them to listen. If I come home with a problem for my husband and he starts throwing potential solutions at me, I'm like, already tried it, wouldn't work, bad idea. You're not a therapist. Stop asking, stop telling me these things. All I really need is for him to go like, that sucks. I'm so sorry you're dealing with that, right? And so we can't fix things all the time. And sometimes just showing up and being present is more than enough. Another one that I've learned and taken to heart recently is not everything is urgent. It might feel urgent to the person who wants your attention, but it's not, and it can wait. And when we're feeling overwhelmed and in that, like, all those dashboard lights are lighting up at the same time, often urgency is something that comes up of like, it all has to be done right now, that hypervigilance. And so being able to slow down and untangle what's urgent, what's emergent, and what can wait, and being able to communicate that with your teams, your colleagues, that like you're intentionally slowing things down can be really helpful. And it can also give them some permission to do the same, because sometimes we all get caught up in this web of urgency. Something that I've noticed here that I've had to do is that if I don't communicate to other people that I'm slowing down, then they just keep like sending things or like, is everything okay? I haven't heard from you. What's going on? Because they're used to me dealing with things with more urgency. So when I first started to slow down a little bit, I had to let folks know, like, I will get to this. I am purposefully slowing this down a little bit. We'll handle it. It's not an emergency. We're going to get to this by X time. And so giving people a little bit of heads up, if you are someone who tends to act with a lot of urgency and you're trying to dial that back, they're going to be very confused. Sometimes you don't recognize a boundary until after it's been crossed, right? And it is okay to decide that you need to reset. So for example, I would be someone who would tell my team, text me anytime, call me anytime. I work weird hours. Sometimes I'm off during the day. Sometimes I work more at night. If you need me, just text me. I'm always available. I will always respond. And that might be fine until I start getting tons of text messages while I'm trying to make dinner and sort out my kids. Because I work technically 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then I'm usually parenting from 3 p.m. till bedtime. And then I'll usually get back on and do a little bit of work later. Most of our therapists work like 11 to 8 because therapists work in the evenings a lot of the time. And so I'll be getting messages or calls at 5, 6, 7 o'clock while I'm trying to cook dinner. I'm trying to feed my kids. I'm driving them to their practices. And I had said, call anytime. And now I'm like, oh, shoot, I don't actually have time to sit and talk through this clinical issue with you because I'm at gymnastics practice. I had to reset, right? So even though I had said, call anytime, it's fine, once I realized that these boundaries were actually not working for me, or I needed to set some, or my boundaries were being crossed, I had to go back and go, you know what? I know that I had said call anytime, but actually, I finish work at 3. So from 3 until 8, I'm usually going to be pretty busy with my kids. If it's an emergency, please call me. But if not, send me an email, send me a message. I'll either get back to you after 8 if I'm working later that night, or we'll talk about it the next day. And had to reset expectations, and that's okay. But a lot of times folks get caught up in the idea that, like, I didn't set that boundary up front, so now I can't, right? And that's a surefire way for us to get caught in that cycle of compassion fatigue because you have to give all of yourself all the time. So it's okay to change your boundaries. And finally, people don't have to like them. They don't have to love them. They can even be irritated. Your boundaries are about what's okay and what's not okay for you. You're not telling other people what to do. You're saying what's okay for you and what you'll do and what you won't do. And sometimes that upsets people, especially if you're someone who has not set a lot of boundaries. So this can show up in your personal life, in your work life. We could probably do a whole hour just on boundaries. But for this one, it really is about you accepting and getting used to the idea that people might be uncomfortable or upset with your boundaries sometimes, and that's not a problem, right? They'll get over it, they'll get used to it. Maybe you'll have to talk about it. It's okay. But we also tend to be people pleasers a lot in these types of positions, and so we don't like people to be upset with us, and so we go the extra mile, even if it's crossing our boundaries. So when we start actually enforcing our boundaries, there might be a little bit of tension for a while until people get used to it. And just kind of letting yourself get used to that idea. All right. And so we're going to finish off today with a loving kindness meditation that you may have done with me before. I really like these as ways to wrap up these kind of conversations because, especially when we're talking about compassion fatigue and taking care of ourselves. So, if you're in a comfortable place right now to close your eyes, I invite you to close your eyes. If not, just kind of lower them a little bit and take a big deep breath in and a big exhale. And another deep breath in and an exhale. And now in your mind, I want you to picture someone who you really care about. Someone or something, could be a pet, a human, living or not, someone you care about really deeply. And I want you to visualize them sitting in front of you. And I want you to imagine a beam of light going from your heart to their heart. And I want you to say to them and send to them in that beam of light, may you be happy. May you be safe. May you have peace. May you feel loved. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you have peace. May you be loved. Now I want you to imagine more people joining that group. It could be your family, your neighbors, your work colleagues, your basketball team. Imagine a whole bunch of people that you really care about, all standing in front of you. And imagine now that white light shining from your heart into all of their hearts. So lots of beams of light shooting out from you to them. And I want you to send that same message to all of them through those shooting lights. May you be happy. May you all be safe. May you all have peace. May you all feel loved. May you all be happy. May you all be safe. May you all have peace. May you all feel loved. And now in front of that big group of people standing in front of you, at the very front of that whole crowd, I want you to picture yourself standing right in front of you. And now all those beams of light from all the people in the room are all shooting into your own heart right in front of you. And I want you to give yourself that same message. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I have peace. May I feel loved. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I have peace. And may I feel loved. You take a big, deep breath in. Imagine all that white light filling up your body, and a big exhale. You can open your eyes if they were closed. Maybe give yourself a stretch, reach up over your head, roll your shoulders down your back, and shake it out a little bit. All right. So we're at the end of our time together today. If there's anything that you're taking away from this conversation today, or sort of an insight that we're um, able to bring into the rest of our work week with you, I'd love for you to share that in the chat just to know what kind of stood out the most for you. If you have any questions, I'm here for a few more minutes. But it was so nice to be with you today. It's been a pleasure.
So, and really quickly, I did put in the chat, Amy had mentioned earlier, there are some in-person trainings happening in the month of November. So in the chat are the dates and locations and the registration links for the 3 trainings that are taking place in November, if you are interested in those. If you click on that link, it'll give you the description, the time frame, it'll give you much more information. But really quickly, I just wanted to share those with everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope you guys can all make it. It's going to be the same training all 3 days. So whichever one's closest to you, we'd love to see you there. But we'll be working on conflict and communication, I think, in the morning, and then working on values-based work in the afternoon. So it's going to be a great day. So thank you so much for coming.